Hello, welcome to our virtual Justice on the Block Legal Informational Clinic. My name is Charlotte Waters, Communications Manager for Legal Services of North Florida. This clinic is part of the virtual series Know Your Child's Rights, Education Rights. And to help us learn more about whether a school can Baker Act your child today, we have Stephanie Johnson, Senior Attorney in the Tallahassee Office of Legal Services of North Florida, and Cheryl Sattler, Education Advocate with Legal Services of North Florida. This video provides legal information and should not be considered legal advice. And this video does not create an attorney-client relationship or substitute legal advice you've been given. You may have defenses that we haven't discussed here, so seeking out an attorney or legal help is always advisable. For more information about legal services in North Florida, go to www.lsnf.org or call 850-385-9007. We have additional information on our website, and we are so happy to have you with us today. And go ahead and take it away, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. So let's just jump right into it, and let's start with basics. So Cheryl, what is a Baker Act?
Yeah, great question. We talk about this stuff all the time, and what is it? The Baker Act is actually the name of the law, and typically what it means is that someone decides that another person needs mental health assistance. So they're a danger to themselves or others because of some mental health problem that hasn't been addressed. And a Baker Act is the law that allows you to take that person against their will to a hospital. They call it a receiving facility, but generally it's a hospital.
Okay, and how does the Baker Act process start?
Well, since we're talking about schools, it starts when there's a problem. So, if a kid goes out of control, or, sometimes it'll be a teenager who says that they want to end their life, which, nobody wants it to happen. So the school wants to do something. Or it could be a child's just melting down. They're uncontrollable. They're just, and, so experts look at this child and say, we can't do anything here. We have got to send this child somewhere else to make sure that this child gets help. So it's really well-meaning. It does require somebody with some expertise to make that decision. That could be sometimes a school psychologist or other mental health professional, social worker, or a law enforcement officer. And that actually is something that's coming up a lot. I should just mention, Steph, that this happens a lot in Florida. Last year, we Baker Acted more than 36,000 kids. Now, that might not be 36,000 separate kids, but 36,000 times. And that's an awful lot. So what's happening now is that school resource officers, we've got somebody who's a cop-like person in every school. And a lot of times those are the folks that are making the decision to put a child in a cop car and take them.
Well, let me ask you this, Cheryl. So you talked about mental illness, and what if I have a child who's autistic? So they don't have a mental illness, they're autistic. The meltdown, if that's what we call it, is not related to a mental illness. And then what do you do about that?
That is an excellent question, and that certainly does happen. And we read about it in the newspaper. In fact, there's a lot of information about what's going on around the Baker Act in the newspaper. And I would encourage anybody who is interested in this just to, do a quick Google search and see what's going on around Florida. So there is, in the law, you are supposed to not Baker Act someone who does not have a mental disability. And developmental disabilities like autism are not mental disabilities. However, not everybody has the expertise or understanding of either autism or other developmental disabilities or the law to make that distinction. And so what happens, unfortunately, a lot of the time, is that people kind of err on the side of, well, we'll just try this and see if it works. And, that's not great. In fact, it's very traumatic for a child to be Baker Acted. And particularly, if you get to this Baker Act facility, you can't leave. You're there, under this legal directive. And they can't do anything for you anyway. It's a terrible situation, and one that really needs to be addressed.
So you talked about it being a traumatic situation. Just can you describe, like, if a professional at the school decides that a Baker Act needs to happen, what exactly, how does the child get from the school to the hospital?
Sure. So, different districts do things differently, but by and large, what happens is that somebody will fill out a piece of paper that says, who the child is and what's going on. And then they'll often put the child in a police car. And because of other laws, you usually end up with that child in handcuffs or in other restraints. They're in the back of the car. And I don't know if you've ever ridden in the back of a police car, Steph, but I have. Not that I've been arrested, but under other circumstances. And it's a very creepy feeling because you can't unlock the doors. There's big plexiglass, barring you off from anybody. It's very scary. It was scary for me as an adult. And if you're a child who's, having some sort of breakdown, it's got to be way scarier for them.
Well, do parents even get noticed that this is happening?
No. Right now, there is no requirement in the Baker Act to notify parents. And that has gotten a lot of criticism. I think a lot of parents would want to know and want to maybe accompany their child or try to calm their child down so that the child didn't have to go to this hospital. And there may be a couple of ways that you might be able to work with the school to have that happen if you're kind of thinking that this might happen to your child. Maybe they've already had meltdowns at school, or maybe you've gotten questions that say, have you gotten this child some help? So if you're sort of reading between the lines, there are a couple of things you can do. First of all, you can notify the school in writing that you want to know that if anything happens to my child, or you are considering any kind of medical intervention for my child, that I want to know, and I want to be notified immediately. That doesn't have any legal effect, but most of the time schools are really trying to have good relationships with families, and they don't want to just be mean. And so, if you make the point that you're concerned and that you think, you're able to calm the child down, then, that's one thing. The second thing you can do is, if there's a good way to calm the child down without you being there, let them know what that is. So maybe the child needs to go outside and walk around in the grass. Maybe they really like the swing set. Maybe they need to sit in a darkened room for 5 minutes, with a toy. Whatever it is.
Maybe listen to music.
Listen to music, sure. I mean, kids are different, and all kinds of things, appeal to different kids, and your child, the best. So if you can give the schools some strategies so that they don't feel so helpless, and that way they can do something without calling you, and, because nobody wants to say, oh, well, we've got to call John's mom again, particularly if this is something that happens, more than once.
And what about resource officers? Is there any talk about training them, trying to train them on calm down procedures, or maybe even determining whether it's a mental illness or a developmental disability, things like that?
That's something that has been talked about in the newspapers as well. But right now, unfortunately, there's literally no required training for school resource officers. Everything is decided by local school districts and local sheriff's offices. And so, you'll have some districts that are very enlightened and have this kind of training. But by and large, and this is true across the country, there's very few police officers of any kind, including school resource officers, who have any training on dealing with kids and trauma, or just kids. There is a new requirement in the law, just happened last session, for schools to use what they call de-escalation. And de-escalation is basically a fancy word for helping a child calm down. So we haven't seen how that's going to work yet. We are still waiting to see. There's supposed to be some direction and some guidance for schools on how to do that. But I'm really hopeful that, you know, nobody wants to make sending a child in a police car to a mental hospital the first answer to an issue. And so I think they're trying to find other ways to lessen this, and that's really a great thing.
Okay, yeah, that's a very great thing. And so, what happens after the child is released from the Baker Act? Is there anything that's supposed to happen at that point?
Well, that's a good question. And that's, again, something that people are talking about. Um, the school obviously knows that the child has been Baker Acted. There is a record, a permanent record of the fact that your child has been in a Baker Act facility. Now, there's two things that can happen at the facility, right? The first thing is they do whatever exams they want to do, and they do have to do them within 72 hours. So you can't be held forever. But then you run into weekends and holidays, and it gets 72 hours stretches out sometimes, and that's also very unfortunate. But they can do the test and find out you're fine. And then they just release you, and presumably nothing happens. Now, if they find out that you do have a mental health problem and you do need help, they can do one of two things. They can hold you and give you some of that help. They might start counseling, they might give you some medicine, or they can release you and say, this is the kind of help that this child needs in the community. And there are lots of resources, for getting those particular services. They're not supposed to just kick you out the door and say, good luck. But again, these hospitals are all really different. And so sometimes, if parents are really assertive and ask lots of questions, they may get a lot more help. Whereas parents who are just like, I just want to get out of here with my kid, they may not get a lot of, resources and information and support. So, hopefully that's something that will become more uniform. There are mental health resources in every community, and I would encourage any parent whose child is Baker Acted to make some calls and find out, because there is lots of stuff out there for you.
Wow. This is an important topic, and it seems like constantly changing. Is there anything else about Baker Acts you wanted to mention?
I think that one of the things that I'd like to say is that the Baker Act wasn't designed for children. And so I think the Baker Act is about maybe 50 years old. And now that there's so many things that have happened, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Parkland shooting, hurricanes, refugees, COVID, all of these things that we know really impact kids, daily violence, domestic abuse, all the stuff. We're seeing that lots more kids are getting Baker Acted. And so the good thing in that, I am stretching to find a good thing, is that people are now saying, no, wait a minute. If we're going to do this on kids, maybe we need to do some more thinking. So if this is something that's happened to you, I would urge you to tell your story. If your child is autistic and has been Baker Acted and rode in the back of a police car, tell someone, because the more that people step forward and say this is wrong, the more likely change is. And I think I know we all want to get kids the help they need. It's just a question of how to do that without making things a little bit worse.
All right. So this has been super useful information, Cheryl. Just want to let you all know that our next discussion in our educational series is on March 10th, when we'll be talking about school discipline, which includes expulsions and suspensions. So thank you all very much for tuning in.